What does this secluded church in a backstreet in the city of Leiden have to do with an unknown son of Prince William of Orange? Why does this church have such a remarkable shape? And what special link does this church have with St. Paul's Cathedral and the Royal Albert Hall in London? Welcome to medieval Leiden, where the construction of Saint Pancras Church, close to the city's most important church, Peter's Church, takes us back to the century in which the city not only grew rapidly, but also saw a power struggle between a pastor and the wealthy bourgeoisie. In 1294, this highland on the sandy hill next to the Burgt became part of the fast-growing city of Leiden, but ecclesiastically it was still officially part of the area of the small nearby village of Leiderdorp. To the displeasure of the Leiderdorp preacher, Bartholomeus van Zwieten, many of the new residents that settled around these branches of the Rhine did not go to church in Leiderdorp, but to the much closer Peter's Church. This also meant less income for van Zwieten, so he tried to build a small auxiliary church here next to the river, for which he finally received permission from the Bishop of Utrecht in 1314, after several attempts. Less than 10 months later, in 1315, the small wooden church dedicated to the holy martyr Saint Pancras was completed, and it soon attracted more and more visitors, much to the chagrin of the priests of Peter's Church. The small church became the center of a power struggle, also because the wealthy bourgeoisie did no longer want to tolerate the fact that priests of the Peterskirk systematically ignored agreements about the distribution of ecclesiastical offices. Somewhere around 1335, the wooden church was replaced by a stone church on the high plateau of the sandhill near the Burgt, which was therefore soon nicknamed the Hooglandse Church, or Highlands Church. A real quarrel over the believers took place, and until 1371, through various judicial decisions, residents around the church were alternately forced by fines to go to church in the Hooglandse, and then again in the Peter's Church. From 1366 onwards, the battle was largely over when 5 conspirators, including the jurist Philip of Leiden, had had enough and convinced the Bishop of Utrecht to have the Hooglandse Church elevated to a chapter church and had the ecclesiastical offices transferred from the Peter's Church. This also made an enlargement of the choir necessary, and around 1392, the stone church was first widened with side aisles. If you look closely at this model of the first stone church, you recognize that the current western facade still has the contours of this late 14th century church. The increased prosperity soon ensured that plans were developed to enlarge the Hooglandse to a cruciform church that, of course, had to surpass the Peter's Church. Around 1480, the choir was expanded in Brabant Gothic style, with the cheap brick being replaced by more expensive natural stone from Mechelen. Like many Christian churches, it faces east, where Jerusalem lies and the sun rises, because Jesus is seen as Sol Oriens, or the light of the world. Little archival material is known about the exact start of the extensions, but dendrochronological research has dated the oak in the roof of the choir and the ambulatory between 1472 and 1490. The construction of the transept was soon started, and from the air, it is easy to see why a church like this is called a cruciform church. The transept in the Hooglandse Church consists of the Chapel of Our Lady on the north side and the Holy Cross Chapel on the south side, which were built around 1490 and make the transept more than 65 meters long, which resembles the length of the largest French Gothic cathedrals. In those years, Leiden had grown to the largest city within the borders of the present-day Netherlands with around 12,000 inhabitants. At that time, nothing remained of the old 14th century brick church except the nave, tower, and west wall, and plans were in place to renovate and enlarge this nave as well. But things would turn out differently because at the beginning of the 16th century, the Leiden wool industry collapsed and religious turbulence arose when Jan van Leiden wanted to found a new Jerusalem here in 1535. He failed, but around 1535, work in the church started to dwindle, and dendrochronological research shows that the last roof reinforcements in the nave date from 1544, meaning that the planned clerestory with high windows was never built. But what kind of church would Leiden have had if the work had not been halted by these problems? In the church, there is a miniature by Joop Volker from 2015, which should give an impression of the church according to these grand 15th century plans. We project the model over the church here to give an impression. But this model is not entirely correct, because as can be seen in this photo from 1982, the foundations for the extension of the church to the west were exposed during sewerage works under the Neustraat. This shows that the planned new west facade would have been located about 10 meters further to the west, and these foundations are shown in the current paving with a different brick pattern. The church would therefore have had to be even grander, and moreover, everything in the architectural style indicates that the architect, whose name is unknown, was probably a descendant of the Keldermans, master builders from Mechelen. It is therefore more logical that the tower had a Gothic appearance, and Leiden could have had a grand European church, such as the St. Rumbold's Tower in Mechelen. But the history of the church certainly did not finish there, and inside we find various remains of this rich history. Before entering, above the west portal, rebuilt in 1665, we find two Christian symbols of transience, the skull and the hourglass. Both symbolize the passage in the afterlife, with an angel's right wing to heaven, or to hell with the left wing of a bat. Darker pages in the history of the church begin when in 1553 Pastor Jan Velman attempted suicide after being accused of raping an 11-year-old girl. Whether he is innocent or not, some pastors at that time did not exactly respect celibacy, and the relationships and even the children they had were a few of the reasons why the Catholic Church was increasingly criticized. It was the prelude to something that is clearly visible in the church, because the iconoclasm also raged here in 1566, and statues and Catholic liturgical objects were destroyed. In 1572, the city of Leiden sided with the revolt, and no Catholic service would ever be held in the church again. From 1574 onwards, Calvinist services were held in the church, and in the 17th century, the church was equipped with Protestant church furnishings. To increase the intelligibility of the spoken word, the pulpit constructed in 1632 was provided with an enormous sounding board. The floor of the church is covered with hundreds of centuries-old gravestones. In the center of the church, we find the grave of Mayor Peter van der Werff, who became famous because when in 1574, the now Protestant city of Leiden was besieged by the Catholic Spaniards and inhabitants were starving. He is said to have said to them, "I have no food, but I know that I must die one day, so eat my body." The mayor was buried here in 1604 in his own Hooglandse Church, which is depicted in the background of this famous painting. Above his grave, an epitaph in remembrance of van der Werff that was constructed in 1661 by famous sculptor Rombout Verhulst can be found. As in large cathedrals, the church contains not one, but two organs. In the north chapel, you will find a 19th century organ that was placed here in 2015 that was originally built for a church in Birkenhead near Liverpool. The builder is none other than Father Henry Willis, who made hundreds of organs, including the organs for the Royal Albert Hall and St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Apart from restoration, a number of stops were added, including on the backside, the so-called double open wood, consisting of very large wooden pipes. The biggest of them produces a bass tone as low as 16 Hz. But the oldest organ can be found in the nave and dates from 1565, is built by Utrecht organ builder Pieter de Swart, and originally was suspended on the south side of the choir. If you look closely, you will see that it is not hanging on a normal wall today, but on that of the tower that should have been demolished in the 15th century. This organ was once seen and heard by the unknown celebrity who has the most beautiful grave here in the church, none other than a full son of William of Orange, Justinus of Nassau. Yes, you heard that right. Here lies buried a full-fledged son of the father of the fatherland of the Netherlands. Justinus lies here, and not in the royal crypt in Delft, because he was a bastard son that William had with his mistress Eva Elings, shortly after his first wife died. But Willem did recognize Justinus, and provided him with a good education at the University of Leiden, and Justinus then became an admiral, one of the few members of the House of Nassau who were active at sea. After his seaman's life, he was appointed governor of Breda, the city of the Nassaus, but unfortunately had to surrender this city to the Spanish in 1625. And if you know this famous painting by Velázquez, did you know that it is Justinus of Nassau who hands over the city key? He lived the last 6 years of his life in a rented house on the nearby Hooglandse, and was buried in 1631 in his own burial chamber under this tombstone. And that brings us to the end of the tour in and around the Cathedral of Light.